How to Age Disgracefully is set in a community centre in Hammersmith in London, so right on the River Thames. And on one side of the community centre, there's a senior citizen social club, and on the other side, there's a council-run nursery. And it's really a story about what happens when the community centre comes under threat. It's about to be redeveloped, and the senior citizens club together with the nursery next door to try and save their community centre. Um, and as with all of my novels, there's a sort of ensemble cast which covers a whole host of ages, from a single dad called Ziggy, who's only 18, single father, and right up to the senior citizens, notably Daphne, and Art, and a whole bunch of others. And yeah, they're real characters. The we start off by meeting Lydia, who is she's the same age as me, so she's in her mid-50s, and like me, she's sort of menopausal, dealing with an empty nest. Her kids have sort of left home, and she thinks her husband is having an affair. And she hasn't been in the workplace formally for a long time, so she's completely lost her sense of self. She's lost her self-confidence. And she gets a job running this senior citizen social club. And she thinks that it's all going to be about jigsaws and baking and playing cards and that sort of thing. And it turns out that the senior citizens that she has to deal with have completely different ideas about what sort of things she wants to do. So when she first says to them, "So, what sort of activities, would you be interested in?" And they say things like skydiving and speed dating. And yeah, so she gets a bit of a shock. And yeah, so that's really where it all begins. That's when I came up with this idea of this, this senior citizen social club and this nursery, and how they might come together and what might happen. I had this vision in my head of a minibus, going on. You know how you see these buses taking groups of people off on a day trip, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a minibus which was filled with senior citizens and a few really young kids, and they were going off on a day trip somewhere, and they get pulled over by the police, and the policeman is looking for a particular person who's committed a crime, but all of the old people think that the policeman is after them because they're all hiding something. They all have a crime that they've committed, and they all start confessing. And I just found that whole idea really interesting, of people who you wouldn't expect to be felons, all having obviously committed some sort of felony. So that was actually the scene I started with. That's the prologue to the book, is this minibus being pulled over and all of the senior citizens confessing to some form of crime. And then through the rest of the book, we find out what crimes they committed. So we know right up front that all of them have a secret. They all have something in their past that they've done that, that they're sort of hiding in some way, shape, or form. So the various characters are Daphne, who is probably the lead character. I think she's amazing. I really want to be her when I grow up. So she is definitely hiding something. We don't know what, but we do know that for some reason she hasn't really left her apartment much for about 10 years before she decides to join this social club. And she doesn't really like other people, and she is very feisty. So, for instance, she uses a walking stick, not because she has problems walking. She actually does yoga and Pilates regularly, but because she keeps it as a weapon, in case somebody really annoys her. And she does things like, we discover at one point that she deliberately sometimes takes dark alleyways, hoping that somebody will try and mug her so that she can attack them with her walking stick. So she's a sort of really feisty old bird, and as I said, we know that she has some big secret, but we don't know what. And then there's Art, who is a failed actor, and he's been an extra his whole life. So he's always like the person that dies in the first few seconds, and for the rest of the episode, he's the dead body that people talk over. So he's been trying to he's been looking for his big break forever and ever, and it's never arrived. And right at the beginning, his agent basically tells him that, the game is up and he's not going to be able to find him any more work. And so yeah, so that's art. And then there's Ziggy, who is, as I said, an 18-year-old single father who lives on a really rundown council estate, which is sort of ruled over by various drug gangs, and that he tries hard not to get caught up in. And there's Lydia we've talked about, but some of the other senior citizens you mentioned Ruby. I love Ruby because she is a yarn bomber. And I don't know if you've come across that expression, but it's somebody who loves knitting and knits things that they then leave in public places. So like knitting a hat for a post box, for instance. So it's a bit like graffiti in knitting. And she is, so it's a bit like, so I call her Yarnsy because it's like Banksy but with yarn. So there's Ruby, who is the fabulous yarn bomber, and then there's Anna, she's like an ex trucker. So she used to drive long distance trucks. She still wears a lot of leather. She has a lot of tattoos. And we know that she had five husbands, all of whom died in suspicious circumstances. But we don't know whether that's a coincidence or not. So yeah, so that's Anna, and she drives a mobility scooter, but she drives it very aggressively. It's one thing I always love asking other authors is, are you a plotter or a pantser? Meaning fly by the seat of your pants. And I always find the difference between the way people go about doing exactly the same thing in completely different ways. I find that really interesting. And I'm sort of in between the two in that I always know the beginning, and I always know the end, and I have a few key scenes along the way that I know too. But what I don't know is all the detail in between. And I don't know it for a couple of reasons. One is because until I get to know a character really well, I don't know how they're going to react to things or what they're going to say, what they're going to do. So I sort of feel like I need to start writing in order to get to know the characters, in order that they can show me where to go and what to do and what they're going to say. So yeah, so I can't know all those details up front, but also I sort of feel like those spaces is where the magic happens. If I were to plan everything out in detail right at the beginning, I worry that there would be no magic. I wouldn't be able to have those moments where a character starts improvising and doing something that I find totally surprising, but go along with because it makes sense at the time. So to give you an example, the Authenticity Project, when I started writing that, I knew the beginning, which didn't change. I knew the end, which didn't change. But there's one main character who, about three-quarters of the way into the book, I suddenly realized that they'd been lying to me the entire time. And I was really shocked and really angry with them, actually, that they'd been hiding something from me. And I went along with it, and I wrote, I revealed this big secret. And I think the reason why I haven't met a single reader who has seen that twist in that novel happen, and I think the reason they didn't see it happening is because I didn't see it happening either. Because I think as a writer, if you know that a big reveal is about to happen, you accidentally leave clues, in the way people say things or do things, because you are aware of what the truth is. So even if you try and hide it, there are things that leach out. Whereas if it's a complete surprise to you, there are no clues. There's no little hints about what's going to happen until it happens. And, and I think you need to leave space for that kind of magic. When I first started writing, I found dialogue the most difficult thing. And I think a lot of fiction writers do, because it's a thing we're most unused to writing. So, if you think about, as I said, I spent a long time in advertising, but I didn't write dialogue. I wrote presentations, I wrote emails, I did lots of writing of one sort or another, but dialogue, just so when I first started writing the Authenticity Project, I would go for pages and pages without any dialogue. And then, when I got to the end, I looked back and I thought, oh, I really, this is ridiculous. People aren't talking to each other. Because I found the idea of it quite frightening. Now, dialogue is my favorite thing, because I think you can tell so much about a character by what they say and what they don't say, and how they say it, and how they interact with each other. And it's great fun. And I think, I mean, the way I do it is, as I get to know a character, their voice becomes clearer and clearer. So my first draft, the dialogue is nothing like as good as it ends up, because I have to go back once I know the characters really well. I go back to the beginning, and then I change and add into their dialogue once their voice is really clear in my head. And it's quite difficult when you're writing from, as I said, I write across multiple characters, so I need to make sure that each of them has a really unique way of talking, and that takes a while to come. And when it does, it's really magical. You can literally hear that character talking in the way that suits them, and not you. And you get to the point where it feels like you're you're just watching a play, you're watching these characters perform, and you're just writing down what they're saying. It feels like, that's when it feels really magical. Writing is when it feels like you're not doing it, they're talking through you, and you're not talking for them. So yeah, so I love dialogue now. And in terms of how, you asked how I get all the characters to interact, and I think the important thing there is that it happens gradually. It's not forced. So they start meeting each other in different ways. So in with How to Age Disgracefully, for instance, one of the ways that the characters come together is through a dog. So in the very one of the very first chapters, there's a Lydia's first meeting of the social club. This isn't a spoiler because it happens very early on, but the ceiling of the community centre falls in, and killing sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It's quite tragic, but killing one of the attendees. In fact, it turns out she actually had a heart attack as it happened, as opposed to being killed by the ceiling itself. Anyway, the point is, her dog is left orphaned, and three of the characters decide to, for their very various reasons, and they all have a very specific and different reason for doing so, all decide that they are happy to help adopt this dog, but none of them wants to do it full time. So three of them share custody of this orphan dog, who is very old and not necessarily very attractive or very nice dog, but orphaned. So that sort of brings three of the characters together in quite interesting ways. So yeah, so I use various different events to start bringing the characters together in different permutations and combinations, and that's great fun, actually. It's sort of, it's again, it's quite a magical thing when they all start interacting.